My wife laughed in my face when I said I'd represent myself in our divorce. "You're an engineer, Jack," she said. "Let the professionals handle this." She had no idea my sister was about to walk into that courtroom and expose 18 months of secrets that would destroy her entire case. My name is Jack Snow, and I'm 38 years old. I run a small structural engineering firm in Denver, Colorado, the kind of place where I spend my days inspecting bridges most people never think twice about, checking for the hairline cracks that decide whether something holds or falls apart. I've always been good at spotting weakness before it becomes catastrophe. Steel, concrete, load-bearing joints, I could read all of it. What I couldn't read, apparently, was my own marriage. Mary and I had been together 9 years, married for 6. She worked as a marketing director downtown, always sharp, always 3 steps ahead in any room she walked into. We had a house in Cherry Creek, a dog named Biscuit who slept between us most nights, and a version of our life that looked, from the outside, like something people envied. My mother used to say we were the couple who'd actually figured it out. I believed her. I had no reason not to. I'm telling you this from a courthouse hallway, 11 months after the night that started unraveling everything I thought I knew. Fluorescent light overhead, a manila folder in my hands, the kind of quiet that only exists outside a courtroom right before something irreversible happens inside one. I was standing there alone. No lawyer beside me. Just me and a folder thick with everything I'd learned the hard way. If you'd told me a year earlier that I'd end up here, divorced from the woman I'd built a life with, representing myself against one of Denver's most feared family attorneys, I'd have laughed. Mary certainly did, the day she found out I wasn't hiring anyone. She wasn't wrong to laugh, not at first. What she didn't account for was who would eventually walk through those courthouse doors beside me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up in that hallway, you need to go back 6 months, to an ordinary Tuesday night, and a laptop screen I wasn't supposed to see. It was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays were sacred in a strange way, the one night Mary always worked late, client dinners, she said, and I'd stopped questioning it years ago, the way you stop testing a smoke detector that's never once gone off. That night, a client meeting of mine got cancelled, so I came home 2 hours early, expecting nothing more than a quiet house and leftovers. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen island, still logged into her email. I wasn't looking for anything. I was reaching past it for my charger when a subject line caught my eye: Denver condo, final walkthrough. We didn't own a condo. We'd never even talked about one. I sat down at that island and read every message in the thread, the light from the screen the only thing illuminating the kitchen. She'd been renting an apartment for 4 months, the lease split between her name and someone else's, no explanation anywhere in the correspondence, just 2 signatures and a move-in date already 3 months past. I didn't confront her that night. I told myself I was being careful, gathering facts before accusations, but the truth is I was scared of what I'd find if I asked the wrong question too soon. So I sat with it. I started pulling bank statements quietly, cross-referencing charges, building a picture one transaction at a time, like reading stress fractures in a beam nobody else had noticed yet. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't understand until much later, was that Mary's mother had been left with nothing after a 22-year marriage, every asset in her father's name, every account inaccessible the day he decided he wanted out. Mary had watched that unfold as a teenager and promised herself, quietly, permanently, that it would never happen to her. I didn't know that story yet. I only knew there was a condo I'd never seen, a lease with my wife's name on it, and a silence growing between us that felt, for the first time in 9 years, like something I couldn't fix by just waiting it out. I waited 3 weeks before I said anything, which felt unbearable at the time but was, in hindsight, the smartest thing I did in this entire ordeal. I wanted proof, not a fight I'd lose on emotion alone. Engineers don't guess at load capacity, we calculate it. I approached my own marriage the same way, and some nights I hated myself for that instinct even as I leaned on it. By the time I brought it up, I had bank statements, credit card records, and a timeline stretching back 18 months. We were in the living room, the television playing something neither of us was watching, throwing blue light across the coffee table where I set 2 printed statements between us like evidence at a trial neither of us had agreed to yet. You've been paying rent on a condo I've never seen, I said. Explain it. She didn't deny it, and that surprised me more than the condo itself. She looked at me with a steadiness I hadn't expected, almost relief, like she'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had. I was protecting myself, she said. You'd have done the same thing. I asked her what, exactly, she needed protection from. 9 years together, and I genuinely didn't know the answer. She didn't give me one that night. She just repeated herself, calmer the second time, like she'd rehearsed it. I was protecting myself. I noticed something else that night, something I didn't understand until much later. How quickly she'd moved from confusion to composure, like she'd already run this conversation in her head a dozen times before I ever found that email. It wasn't the reaction of someone caught off guard. It was the reaction of someone who'd been expecting to get caught eventually, and had already decided how she'd handle it when it happened. I went to bed on the couch that night. Biscuit followed me down the hallway and curled up beside me anyway, like even the dog could tell something in the house had shifted for good. 2 weeks later, I was served divorce papers at my office, in front of 3 employees who pretended very hard not to notice a process server walking through our lobby. Mary filed first, and she filed smart. Her attorney was a woman named Patricia Cole, someone every family law circle in Denver seemed to know by reputation alone. People didn't say Patricia Cole was good. They said she didn't lose. I called 3 divorce attorneys that week. All 3 gave me some version of the same warning. Going up against Patricia Cole without serious representation was a losing bet before the first hearing even started. One of them quoted a retainer that would have gutted half my savings before we set foot in a courtroom together. I told Mary I'd get a lawyer eventually, that I just needed time to find the right one. She laughed. Not cruelly, that was almost the worst part. It was an easy, confident laugh, the kind that comes from already knowing how a story ends. You're an engineer, Jack, she said. Let the professionals handle this. I thought about that sentence for weeks afterward. Let the professionals handle this. As if the last 9 years of my life were a project I wasn't qualified to manage. As if I hadn't spent my entire career being the person other people trusted to catch what everyone else missed. Backstories surfaced later, in fragments, through people who knew her better than I apparently had. Mary had been planning her exit with more precision than I wanted to admit, consulting Patricia Cole nearly a year before she ever filed. The condo wasn't impulsive. It was infrastructure. She'd been building her own foundation quietly, plank by plank, while I was still checking the ones underneath our marriage for cracks I assumed only I could see. I didn't know any of that yet, sitting in my office holding those papers. I only knew I had a decision to make, and not much time to make it. I decided to represent myself, and a lot of people thought that decision was reckless, maybe even a little arrogant. Part of it was money. I wasn't going to bankrupt myself fighting a war I might still lose regardless. But the real reason, the one I didn't say out loud to anyone, was that I didn't trust a stranger to care about the truth as much as I did. Lawyers optimize for outcomes. I wanted someone in that room who actually understood what had happened to me. I spent my nights at the kitchen table with legal pads and printouts, Colorado family law statutes open on my laptop, coffee going cold beside me while Biscuit slept under the table like he was standing guard. I read everything I could find about asset division, hidden accounts, discovery requests. I felt, for the first time in years, like I was studying for an exam I couldn't afford to fail. I thought about calling my sister, Claire, more than once. She'd gone to law school at the University of Michigan and spent 6 years as a litigation associate before leaving corporate practice to open her own small firm, focused on financial fraud cases. She would have known exactly what to do. But we hadn't spoken much in 2 years, not since a bitter falling out over our late grandfather's inheritance, words said on both sides that neither of us had fully taken back. Pride is a strange, expensive thing. I told myself I didn't want to ask her for anything, especially not this. What I didn't let myself think about, not yet, was how much that condo lease resembled something bigger than an affair or an apartment. Money had been moving quietly out of our joint investment account for over a year, small enough not to trigger alarm, consistent enough that I should have noticed sooner. I hadn't. I was too busy inspecting bridges for cracks to notice the one forming in my own bank statements. The first hearing was mostly procedural, but it was the moment everything stopped feeling theoretical. Mary walked in beside Patricia Cole, dressed like she was heading into a board meeting rather than a courtroom, composed in a way that made my own hastily knotted tie feel like a costume. I sat alone at the respondent's table, my folder of bank statements and printouts suddenly looking thin compared to the leather portfolio across the aisle. Mary caught my eye once, early on, and smiled. Not warmly. It was the kind of smile that already knows the ending of the story being told. Patricia Cole requested an accelerated timeline for asset division, citing complexity that required urgent resolution. The judge granted it without much debate. I left that hearing with a court date 3 weeks out and a sinking, specific fear that I was already outmatched in a language I hadn't fully learned yet. What I didn't know, sitting in that gallery, was how deliberately that complexity had been engineered. The condo wasn't just a hideaway from a marriage going stale. It was tied to a business account Mary had quietly opened using funds siphoned from our joint portfolio over 18 months. Money we'd told each other, told our families, was being saved for a house. A real one. Ours. I'd signed off on statements without reading every line, trusting the numbers the way you trust a bridge you've driven over 100 times without inspecting it yourself. I remember driving home that night replaying her smile, trying to figure out what exactly she knew that I didn't. It would take my sister, and about 6 hours of forensic document review, to show me the full shape of it. But that night, all I had was the hollow feeling of a man who suddenly suspected the ground beneath him had been quietly redesigned without his knowledge, and no one had bothered sending him the new blueprints. I told Claire, almost by accident. She called about our mother's upcoming birthday, some logistics about a dinner reservation, and something in my voice must have given me away mid-sentence, because she stopped talking and asked, flatly, "Jack, what's going on with you?" I told her everything, standing in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the same island where I'd first seen that email months earlier. The condo. The missing money. The hearing. The fact that I was walking into a courtroom against Patricia Cole with nothing but printouts and a legal pad. She went quiet for a moment, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Send me every financial document you have. Tonight." No hesitation. No mention of the 2 years of distance between us, no reference to the fight we'd never properly resolved. Just an instruction, the kind you give someone you've already decided to help. I didn't know it then, but Claire had handled at least 3 cases in the past 2 years that followed an eerily similar shape, a spouse quietly constructing a second financial life months, sometimes years, before ever filing, betting that the other side would be too overwhelmed, too under-resourced, or too trusting to catch it in time. She recognized the pattern in my case almost immediately, before she'd even opened half the documents I sent her. "This isn't random," she told me on a call 2 days later, her voice different now, sharper, more clinical. "This took planning. I need the LLC registration records, and I need them fast." I asked her why she was helping me after everything between us. She was quiet for a second. "Because you're my brother," she said. "And because whoever set this up made one mistake. They assumed nobody on your side would know how to look." The next hearing, I wasn't alone. Claire walked in beside me carrying a leather folio instead of a legal pad, calm in a way that made the entire room recalibrate around her presence. I watched Mary's confident posture stiffen slightly the moment she registered who was sitting next to me. "I'm not your attorney, Jack," Claire had told me the night before, going over her notes at my kitchen table until nearly 2 in the morning. "I'm your sister, sitting beside you as consulting counsel. But everything I found, we're using today." Patricia Cole objected almost immediately once the hearing opened, questioning Claire's standing in the room, her tone sharp with the particular irritation of someone encountering an unexpected variable. The judge allowed Claire to remain as an advisor, noting it was within my right to have consulting counsel present. I watched Mary lean toward her attorney and whisper something urgent, her expression shifting for the first time since this entire process began. It was a small moment, barely visible if you weren't looking for it, but I was looking for it. 9 years of marriage teaches you to read a person's face even when they're trying very hard not to be read. That flicker of uncertainty was the first crack I'd seen in Mary since the night I found that email, and something about it steadied me more than any legal argument could have. Claire leaned over during a brief recess and murmured, "They weren't expecting anyone to trace the LLC back this far." I didn't fully understand what she meant yet. I wouldn't, not until the next hearing, when she laid out 18 months of transactions in a sequence so precise it felt less like a legal argument and more like watching someone read stress fractures in a beam everyone else had assumed was solid. For the first time since this began, I let myself believe I might actually walk out of that courthouse with the truth intact. Claire stood and methodically laid out 18 months of transactions across the courtroom screen. The shell account, the condo lease, transfers disguised as consulting fees routed to an LLC that, on paper, had no official connection to Mary at all. Except it did. Claire had traced the registered agent back to Mary's college roommate, who had quietly incorporated the LLC on Mary's behalf nearly a year before she ever filed for divorce. The courtroom went still in a way I'd never experienced before. The particular silence of a room, realizing it had been told an incomplete story. Mary's face drained of color as each document appeared, one after another, dates and figures that lined up too precisely to be coincidence. Patricia Cole started flipping frantically through her own files, and I could see, even from across the room, the moment she understood she'd been arguing this case with information her own client had never fully given her. "Recess, Your Honor," Patricia Cole said, her voice tighter than I'd heard it in either hearing. The judge denied it. It came out in pieces after that, some in the courtroom, some later through people who'd known Mary far longer than I had. She hadn't built this because of some dramatic affair or a single betrayal I could point to and blame. She'd started constructing her exit a full year before we ever hit anything resembling a rough patch, quietly insulating herself the way her own mother never had the chance to. It wasn't cruelty, not exactly. It was fear that had calcified, over years, into a plan she'd executed with more discipline than I ever gave her credit for. That didn't make it forgivable. Understanding where a crack comes from doesn't make the structure any less compromised. But sitting there, watching my sister dismantle a story that had nearly cost me everything, I felt something shift in me that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite grief. It was closer to recognition. Of Mary, of Claire, of the version of myself that had spent 9 years assuming the people closest to him would never need to be double-checked. The financial misconduct findings changed everything. The asset division, the credibility of Mary's original claims, the entire tone of a case that had started with her laughing at the idea I'd walk in without a lawyer. That laughter felt like it belonged to someone else's life by the time we reached a settlement 2 months later, on terms that finally reflected what had actually happened rather than the story she'd hoped to tell first. I moved into a smaller place near downtown Denver, close enough to my office that I could walk some mornings. Biscuit came with me. That part was never seriously in question, not even by Patricia Cole. Mary and I don't speak much now, not out of anger anymore, mostly just distance, the kind that settles in after something breaks and both people quietly agree there's nothing left to repair. I heard, through mutual friends, that she'd moved out of the condo entirely. The whole arrangement dissolved along with everything else. Claire and I talk every week now. The old rift between us, the one that had lasted 2 years over an inheritance neither of us even discusses anymore, closed faster than I expected, like it just needed one real crisis to remind us what actually mattered between siblings. She still practices financial fraud law, still takes calls some nights from people going through some version of what I went through. And I know, because she's told me, that my case changed how carefully she looks at simple divorce filings now. People ask me sometimes if I regret not hiring a lawyer from the start. I tell them the truth. I didn't need a stranger in that courtroom. I needed someone who already knew who I was before any of this happened. Someone who could read the cracks the way I read them in steel and concrete every day of my working life. Sometimes the right expertise isn't found in a directory. Sometimes it's been sitting across from you at Thanksgiving dinner the whole time, waiting for you to finally ask for help. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.